The kids down our way called it Channel 3, even when I tried to explain to them that it was actually called TSW, because our way happened to be one of those housing projects that basically consists of a gigantic oblong made of concrete with doors and windows studded into it, erected for the sole purpose of keeping the proletariat from dying in the streets. Best education anyone ever got living in one of those was Sesame Street and the numbers in the remote control, assuming they had one, which we didn't. But I digress, which is quite an achievement given that I barely started. Kids down our way called it Channel 3. Those of us who knew the alphabet knew it as TSW. But nationally, it was known under the umbrella name of Independent Television, ITV. ITV is in fact all it's called these days. All the old franchises still exist, but apart from 3, they're all owned by the same company, the ITV company, who don't seem to feel any great affection or duty towards the concept of regional broadcasting, having scaled it back to the point that by now those of us in Cornwall are served from Bristol. I'm probably of the last generation to remember regional ITV with any clarity. I lived through TSW, the hapless West Country, and finally the corporate usurpers Carlton. The one I never knew was Westwood, although while I was a child the older people around me still tended to call it that. 1 or 2 still do to this day. It took almost 5.5 years for ITV to start serving the South West. No one really cares about us rural little paupers in our peninsula. Fully 12 companies put in a bid to run the ITV service for the South West. The eventual victor was Westwood Television, named after the Devon town of Westwood Ho, where the notoriously two-fisted chief executive Peter Cadbury, heir to the chocolate millions, played his golf. They went to air on April the 29th with this quaint but charming little number. Always reminded me of some hitherto undiscovered small films production. This was replaced fairly quickly with a swanky yet somehow aloof model shot, set to the tune of The Holly and the Ivy for reasons beyond the realm of normal human understanding. And apart from a minor font change that even I'm not anal enough to worry over much about, that remained pretty much in place for the next 10 years. But then, in 1972, the people of the South West rubbed their eyes and gawped as red, blue, green, and everything that came with them finally appeared on their ITV screens for the first time. That's right, 1972. I told you nobody cares about us rural paupers. Meanwhile, the rest of the country pointed and laughed because they'd already had colour for the past 5 years. Fortunately, we didn't notice because we were too excited at the prospect of finally finding out what colour Gus Honeybun was. He was grey. Anyway, obviously now Westwood needed a new ident, and they kept their faith with the big boat, seen here being treated as a fetish object in the startup sequence. The ident itself had 2 different tunes in the colour era, one more nautical, the other more television-y, and I'm going to play them both in sequence because I'm quite mad. there. Wasn't that exciting? Of course, back in these days, they didn't have to rely on the ident's charisma alone, because most of the continuity itself was handled by humans with faces. It's called in-vision continuity, and it fell out of favour around the mid-90s, partly because by then pre-recorded continuity was often much cheaper. And it's not as if us viewers deserve anything better than the most basic functionality anyway. Westwood's IVC, if you'll excuse the hip lingo, was crisp, clean and quite aesthetically pleasing, if a little cheap looking. A bit like the special offer signs in a small but reputable grocery store. The best thing about IVC, and something sorely lacking from television these days, is that it gives your channel a face, or more accurately, several faces. Westwood's faces included their God Emperor Roger Shaw, a young and surprisingly foxy Fern Britton, and the legendary Ian Sterling, very much a Loki figure to Roger Shaw's Odin. Sterling had the gift of being completely professional, whilst simultaneously seeming like an absolute amateur. And I don't mean that as a criticism. Quite the opposite. He was a great continuity guy, one of the best. He just wasn't slick. He was too good to be slick. I reiterate, he was a trained professional. He went to Scottish RADA and everything. But he came across like just some bloke you might bump into in the co-op and end up in a 5-minute conversation with, even if you didn't know him. He was good enough to make it seem effortless. But good as he was, Ian wasn't the real star. We all know who the real star of Westwood Television was. No, not him. That's Loki the Lion, the mascot of the Dutch rooms of PBS. Although for some reason Westwood did borrow him for a couple of years. No, you know who I'm talking about. Gus the Honeybun. Augustus J. Honeybun, to give him his full name, was found under a gorse bush in Dartmoor by Peter Cadbury and his original staff, or alternatively he was a stuffed rabbit that someone found or owned who could be crudely manipulated from under the desk by floor managers and off-duty IVC people and the like, during unsold commercial spaces. At the time it was a thing to have a daily slot where the continuity announcers would read out birthday cards for tiny viewers, and Westwood's and later TSW's was co-presented by Gus, who would dole out bunny hops, slightly shonky winks, and later in his career would press a magic button to make the CSO backdrop change. As a puppet he was basically just a teddy bear with a hole in his arse, but us kids never noticed. Westwood quite happily ploughed its regional furrow for just a few months shy of 20 years. The ITV network was regulated at the time by the ITA, which became the IBA after 1972. While the regional companies made and or arranged the programming, the IBA were the ones who actually physically transmitted it and made sure it was all up to scratch, and on irregular occasions would cock a bit of a snookette at the regional company's contracts. If the IBA felt that the company was sucking too hard and there was someone else willing to take it on who would demonstrably do a better job, well, guess what would happen? Meritocracy, of course, was only half the battle, the public side. There was also boardroom politics to contend with, and Westwood's boardroom had been fighting both itself and the IBA for several years, thanks largely to Peter Cadbury, a man who could pick a fight in an empty room with his own thumb. He'd been sacked and rehired by Westwood more times than Howard Kendall at Everton, and the IBA were sick and tired of him. So when an all-new consortium called Television Southwest came along, it was perfect. Knowing when he was beaten, Cadbury washed his hands of the whole affair and sold the company lock, stock and barrel for its last 4 months of operation to its successors, which at least made for a relatively smooth handover, given that by the time Westwood were mounting their farewell broadcast, they'd actually been owned by their successors for 4 months. As for the new guys, they promise to be completely different from Westwood, despite the fact that they spent the last 4 months explicitly being Westwood, promising to be edgy, modern, cool, and interesting. But then all the new ITV companies have said that before launching. We did hear rumours that their new logo and ident was going to be bold and unusual and unlike anything seen on ITV before. We just hoped they wouldn't end up embarrassing the region as a whole.
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, run BT5, 1...
Where is it? There.
Television Southwest opened on the 1st of January 1981 with a bit of behind the scenes BT footage, an abstract Freudian cartoon of an ident accompanied by some proto-Prince only not quite so good electro-funk, and a meaningless, vaguely cubist logo. All this introduced arguably the worst programme they ever made, including That's My Dog, a preening slice of light entertainment hosted for no reason at all by the late Lenny Bennett, a man from Blackpool for Christ's sake. Peter Cadbury probably loved it. Fortunately, it didn't take long for TSW to realise they were actually broadcasting from a brickwork studio in the middle of Plymouth, not a metal and glass edifice in the heart of London's West End. They stopped trying quite so hard to be LWT, and settled into doing exactly the same things Westwood did, with mostly the same people, only with a slightly better visual identity. The initial version of the ident stayed for the first 4 years, and for me it's one of the best idents any ITV station ever had, because there is absolutely nothing quite like it this side of Mexican cable television. And then of course the weird ass logo we finally end up with always seemed perfectly normal and natural to me because I grew up with it. I even had a sticker of it in my bedroom. I couldn't, however, tell you what it was supposed to be, but I know a man who can, at least theoretically. His name's Paul Honeywell. He's a local lad with a rounded Plymouth accent, and he's the one who designed the bloody thing. So here he is trying to explain it on 40 Years of ITV, broadcast in 1995, 3 years after TSW had bitten it.
I based the colours on rivers and fields, but it doesn't actually represent anything in particular, but the idea is that through its simplicity, that somehow it stays in your brain. I remember walking into a pub a couple of days after it went on air, and in the bar, nobody knew me, but in the bar everybody was talking about the TSW logo. So I guess it worked.
So there you have it from the horse's mouth. It wasn't really supposed to be anything in particular. Well, you ask a stupid question, you get a stupid answer. By the mid-80s, the edgy, flashy London media tit image that TSW had tried to cultivate at the start of its life was well and truly dead and in hell. At the same time, the upstart Channel 4 had revolutionised television graphics by using computers to create 3D objects that fly around on the screen. And suddenly, absolutely everyone on the planet, apart from the BBC because they were far too cool, lined up to imitate the new objects flying through space aesthetic. TSW were no exception, but theirs was actually one of the classier ones. See, stately brass band fanfare and everything. No obvious attempt at being whizzy for its own sake. They got that out of their system already. Having said that, we didn't actually see the ident that often, because TSW, like Westwood, preferred to put their faith in human faces, those they'd inherited from Westwood, and newbies like the tousled Jennifer Gavin. But when it did show up, it was a treat. That's how deprived we were, and indeed, still are. There was even an ultra-cheap Christmassy variation in 1987. TSW always had a pretty good sense of branding, especially for such a small company. The logo might have been impossible to describe, but you didn't really have to because it was everywhere. Even its clock ruled. Of course, close downs like this were on the way out. With the eventual success of breakfast television, the IBA started turning its attentions on the massive wodge of dead air at the other end of the day. By 1988, ITV was 24 hours almost everywhere. Along with a few other relatively minor franchises, TSW used Granada's nighttime presentation and programming. Sorry, I mean nighttime. But ever the individualists, TSW slapped their own idents, complete with pre-recorded continuity announcements from Prime Minister Ian Sterling all over the top of it.
This is TSW Nighttime.
Now let's just storyboard this thing for a minute. Unimaginably gigantic serif lettering unfolds from a pocket dimension in front of the planet Jupiter, which at Ian Sterling's command becomes the planet Earth, with southwest England standing triumphantly prominent in the foreground. All to what sounds like a pumped up arpeggiated version of TSW's brass band ident music. If you can think of a more exciting way to convince proles to stay up and watch Garrison's Gorillas and The Hitman and Her, I'd like to hear it. In 1989, ITV itself had an identity crisis. Perhaps noting the free market writing on the wall, the IBA decided to solidify ITV as a brand in itself, scooping up all its little regional franchises and turning them into explicit subsidiaries of a single nationwide brand, united under the cool sax of David Dundas. It was reasonably successful, apparently, but I never knew it happened at all until the internet came along, because TSW flatly refused to either take part or acknowledge its existence. If they'd been kicked in the nuts and commanded to take part, we would have ended up with this. Not the best fit, but not the worst either. Actually, in my opinion, ITV's 1989 generic look was pretty good, certainly better than anything they've used since. They certainly weren't like anything else you'd see at the time, if only because it wasn't obsessed with things flying around in 3 dimensions. The only trouble was that nobody wanted generic ITV. The regions were still reasonably autonomous at the time, and they wanted to use their own identities. Nobody who still remembers the way things used to be really wants generic ITV now. That was ITV's unique selling point. It was your home station. The difference is, of course, that these days they don't care what you think. Partly because the Broadcasting Act 1990 has made it so they don't have to. So ultimately, while the 1989 look was great from a branding and marketing perspective, it was terrible from the perspective of the actual local companies themselves, and it was only the most insecure and underfunded ITV regions that really stuck with the look for more than a couple of years. And some, like TSW, didn't adopt it at all. However, they did adopt some new idents in 1989. The main ident with the proper logo wasn't replaced or anything, but had become increasingly little seen by 1989, because the face of Ian Sterling or Ruth Langsford was just friendlier and more relatable than that abstract thing. Besides, it tended to be shown only before programmes that TSW themselves had made, and those were becoming increasingly thin on the ground by the end of the 80s too. So in 1989 we got these sort of placeholdery type of idents, which were used all the time in tandem with the in-vision announcers. You get a conversational piece with the boyish David Fitzgerald or the wacky Mark Seaman, and then you get an annoyingly bland picture postcard with TSW just in a serif font, not even the logo, which obviously varied depending on the time of year. There's Christmas Variation, of course, which was used every year till the channel died, and unusually enough, a New Year's Variation as well. They weren't terribly exciting either. Bland idents aside, however, by 1990, TSW was well and truly in its imperial phase. Ian Sterling and Ruth Langsford were 5 times as popular in the region as Charles and Diana, and Gus Honeybun, already a broadcasting legend, was now officially the region's God Emperor. So when the Broadcasting Act 1990 came along, the Thatcher government's final and successful attempt to ruin something completely, the good people of Television Southwest were actually pretty optimistic. In fact, some would say insanely optimistic. You see, one of the things the Broadcasting Act 1990 did was to change the way that ITV franchises were awarded. Previously, they were picked by the ITA and IBA based on potential, resources and merits. As in how well they would actually end up running the channel. Under the Broadcasting Act, the IBA became the ITC, and rather than awarding franchises solely on merit, it was reduced to a blind auction, in which the Nazi Party could conceivably have taken over ITV if they'd had enough cash. Another consequence of the Broadcasting Act was that ITV franchises were allowed to buy each other out, which was kind of the opposite of how they were originally intended to work. But more on that later. Ironically, TSW's bid wasn't beaten out by the opposition. It was instead ridiculously high. So high that had they actually won the franchise, the resultant service would have to be run on a shoestring. And so, despite an appeals process that went all the way to the House of Lords, TSW today found itself reporting on its own death. Unlike last time, this was decidedly not going to be just a name change. There were to be all new studios in the middle of an industrial wasteland, no in-vision continuity ever again, and completely new staff. Even Ian Sterling wasn't rehired, which is like firing Santa Claus, even though ultimately they didn't manage to get rid of him altogether. Worst of all, after 31 years, Gus Honeybun was returned to the wild.
Look, I think this is the spot. The Warren should be around here somewhere.
Excuse me, Gus, what do you mean think? You've got the map. You said you knew.
It's not very good at it, I'm sorry.
Well, look over there.
Just try.
And
We're looking for a large hole, which is a... Oh, dear. Come on, out you get.
I found it.
What are you doing?
I think I found it. Gus.
Good.
I'll get him out.
Oh, this is useless now anyway.
I'm sure this is the one.
Come on, boy.
Come on, don't be frightened.
There
oh,
he
he's
is.
frightened, Fitz.
Come on.
Come on.
Up we get.
Gus, do you recognise this?
This is where you were found, we think, 31 years ago in 1961. Very sad. We've done our research, and this is the spot. It's your home.
This is where you were found, cold, wet, lonely, no one to care for you. And who took you in? Westward Television, that's who.
And the rest, as they say, is history.
Can you remember who looked after you in those days?
There'd be Auntie Sheila Kennedy,
Uncle Stuart Hutchison,
Uncle Roger Shaw.
and dare we say it, Auntie Judy Spires.
Oh, yes, no, please, calm
Don't
down.
worry, I don't think she's here.
Calm down.
In fact, you could say, Gus, that an awful lot of people have had a hand in your success.
Yeah, and what a celebrity you turned out to be. Go on, milk it. What a celebrity. Think of all the people and places that you've seen over those 31 years.
All those children you've made smile.
Yeah.
But,
Oh, well.
Gus, what? What do you mean, where's the picnic? There's no picnic. It's not a day out, you know. But in fact, we do have a little surprise for him, don't we?
Ah, yes. Augustus J. Honeybun, superstar international play bunny. This isn't actually your life.
No.
I can go away. These are your parents.
Yes, Mr. and Mrs. Honeybun. You haven't seen them for 31 years. Not a card, not a phone call.
So, Mrs. Honeybun, what have you and Dad been doing for 31 years?
I think we could guess. Gus, look, Fitz. These must be all your brothers and sisters.
That's incredible.
All those bunnies for you to play with. But Gus, this is a very sad moment because this is the time, Fitz. We have to say goodbye.
Very sad.
An end of an era, Gus. But it's been lovely to know you, and please come and see us sometime.
Yeah, you know where I live, don't you? Yeah, well, never mind.
Well, look after him, Mr. and Mrs. Honeybun. And I can't bear farewells. Bye, Gus.
Come on, let's go.
Bye. You said you didn't like him anyway.
So did you.
I didn't. I've
You
never
used
hit
to
him.
Rubbish. Rubbish.
I make absolutely no apologies for showing all of that. That is my childhood in progress that these new boys are squelching. In fact, if not rehiring Ian Sterling was like sacking Father Christmas, this is like taking him out the back of the igloo and shooting him in the head. And what for? I never understood the purpose. Alas, the opinions of 9-year-olds had never had a lot of clout in the world of broadcasting. And so it was that on the 31st of December 1992, the outgoing chief announcer and the future Mrs. Eamon Holmes delivered what would prove to be the last piece of in-vision continuity we would ever see down here on our ITV screens.
In fact, we were talking about this before, and if we were all to choose an area in the ITV network where we'd really, really like to work, it would be here with you, the viewers of the Southwest.
Here.
And in fact, the other thing we were saying was there are people who've left here already within the last few months who are now working with other companies in the network, and I know that at this point their hearts are here in the West Country.
Absolutely, and if you saw our 6 o'clock show earlier, you might have recognised many of those faces who have actually come back from all over the country and the world, in fact, to help us celebrate, and we are celebrating, aren't we, 32
yes.
years of broadcasting in the region.
Yes, we are, and in fact...
Oh, no, sorry.
What?
I was going to say, I know lots of people have asked us to thank you for all your wonderful letters. They've come flooding in.
The letters, yes.
And they've pinned on notice boards all over the building, and rest assured every single one of them has been read, and they're very much appreciated, and we'd like to thank you on behalf of all the staff here for all your good wishes and support. Thank you.
And they've kept us going, I tell you. And back to the viewers again, because you're the most important people here. The final telethon total was £386,120 that you earned for charities here in the Southwest.
That is incredible,
Thanks
isn't
very
it?
much. I mean, it just proves what a great bunch of viewers you are. And I tell you, if you support West Country Television as you've supported us, then they've got nothing to worry about.
And we will be handing over to West Country very shortly, and so on behalf of the staff here at TSW, we would like to wish the staff at West Country Television all the very best for the future, and we hope that you'll be very happy in the region as we've been.
That's it.
That's it. Just remains for us, on behalf of everybody here at TSW, to wish you a very happy New Year, a very good night, and
Happy New
goodbye.
Year.
Happy New Year, and welcome to West Country, your new ITV station for the Southwest.
We look forward to bringing you a new kind of regional television service.
West Country Television debuted in January 1993 with what was essentially an extended advert for the service, followed by the film Best Defence, a Dudley Moore vehicle which was so bad that they ended up scrapping half of the film and replacing it with an almost entirely unrelated film starring Eddie Murphy. It didn't help. To be fair, this was still 100 times more dignified as an opening gambit than TSW managed, even though of all the original programmes mentioned in the advert, approximately one would survive into the channel's second year, and that was the news.
Anybody out there in their own program every Saturday morning,
Which adds up to more than 11 hours of local programming every week in a schedule packed with the very best new series from ITV. All presented with the Southwest viewer in mind.
So welcome to West Country.
And West Country welcomes you into the new year now with our film featuring the talents of Dudley Moore and Eddie Murphy, who together cause mayhem in the military. Fast talking is their best defence.
This was our first glimpse of the West Country ident, or more accurately, ident package. And it was quite a change. For a start, as I said, all our friends were gone, replaced by the omniscient, impersonal, expressionless voice of Peter Griffin. Yes, Peter Griffin. As for the ident itself, while the nature scenes were reminiscent of TSW's later seasonal idents, the production was more polished, the music a billion times classier, and the symbol iconic and monolithic. To be honest, these were bloody good idents. I hated them at the time because I resented West Country itself for taking away Gus Honeybun, Ian Sterling and that fantastic symbol. Not to mention the likes of Fitzgerald, Langsford, Judy Spires, Jennifer Gavin, the Susie Blake lookalike Sally Mean, Mary Ann and the rest. These were like family friends that lived inside the television box, which made New Year's Day 1993 feel like the aftermath of some horrific massacre, or possibly an invasion of the body snatchers, because all our friends have been replaced by potentially nice but awkwardly ingratiating strangers whose faces you can't even see in the continuity booths anymore. There was also a replacement for Gus Honeybun under the uninspiring name of Birthday People, which started out as just the same thing without the puppet, so why did they get rid of the puppet, and flailed around various different formats, only really hitting a successful one when it was far too late to make a difference. Everything takes a bit of bedding in, of course, and by the mid-90s we'd all settled into an agreeable, if bland, groove, something like the polite bonhomie between distant in-laws at a Tupperware wedding reception. Unfortunately, again, this was also when the Broadcasting Act 1990 began to rear its head once more.
Good morning, you're watching Carlton Television for the West Country.
Suddenly, without any warning at all, West Country was dead. And on the 6th of September 1999, the southwest of England gazed in wonder at Carlton Television. Carlton were already infamous as the company that had taken over London from Thames and proceeded to piss all over a remarkable televisual legacy. The first time I saw a Carlton ident in the southwest, I honestly thought it was a mistake. Maybe someone pressed the wrong button and sent the wrong feed to the wrong region, or maybe a transmitter had gone down and we were tapping into the London feed while West Country sorted the problem out. But no, this was no mistake, at least inasmuch as this is what they wanted to happen. Carlton had actually owned West Country since 1996, along with Central, and had now decided to rebrand all its new properties as Carlton so the public wouldn't be confused, in a frankly awesome demonstration of nonchalant contempt for the consumer. That was part of the reason anyway. The other part was the coming of the second and permanent ITV generic look, which we in the southwest missed out on again, at least at first, albeit for the opposite reason we missed out the first time. The first time we missed out because our company refused to take part. This time we missed out because the entire region was the bitch of a gigantic corporation who wanted to get their name in people's heads while they built their empire. To be fair, the idents themselves are actually very good, in the same way that Nazi architecture is very good. These, and the not coincidentally similar generic Hearts idents, represented the moment at which they really started to run ITV into the ground in the name of populism and profits. Unsurprisingly, a leading figure at Carlton at the time was David Cameron. It's a bit of a sour note to end on, so instead, let's remember the good times, when broadcasting titans walked the earth.
I saw you. You got away without paying your fare there, didn't you?